Right, our next news story of the week. Astrobot is out on PlayStation 5, and I'm delighted to see that the recognition for the game, the critical reaction has just been absolutely stellar. And it's great to see that there's almost like complete consensus that this is just an absolutely brilliant, fantastic game. Created by a relatively small developer within Sony, Team Asobi, apparently 65 core developers. Interesting interview at Video Games Chronicle where they went to actually visit the studio in Japan. Get an idea of the ethos, the mentality there. This is just a success story on every level, which we kind of need in the wake of the Concord debacle. And I've played only a small part of the game, but, essentially, if you've played Astro's Playroom, which was installed on your PlayStation 5 when you bought it, it basically sets the scene for everything this game is. And I highly recommend buying it. John, you did the review for us. I'm curious about your reaction to the game.
Oh, I'm very relieved and happy that people are also enjoying this as much as I did. The reaction seems to be like shockingly, overwhelmingly positive. Maybe not shockingly, because it is freaking amazing. I would say this is one of the best things that Sony's ever made. I think it's the best platform game they've ever made. Personally, I like this better than every Ratchet Jack game combined. I think this is better than all of them. This is a real wonderful piece of gaming that just, man, it's hard to even say. Like, that's the thing though, is like, even in the video, there's so much stuff that I did not include in there for purposely not include, because the joy of surprise is so high. There's just so much stuff that happens that's often unexpected, and you're just like, wow. It really does have like just this unbelievable amount of creativity powering it, where like they just came up with cool ideas for levels, and every level is like this bespoke little nugget of an idea. Like, it just feels like it's constantly shifting what's there. And it's all based on these really solid core mechanics and everything. Plus a great visual presentation, great soundtrack, awesome physics display like all over the place. It's just phenomenal stuff.
Cool. And I've got some questions here from supporters. Let's start with this one from Alan, the infamous Alan on the Discord.
Whoa.
Hi guys, where does Astrobot stack up in the platforming pantheon? Better than Mario, Sackboy, Crash Bandicoot, Sonic, etc.? Must be right up there for Game of the Year. What do you reckon, John?
Oh wow, I mean, I like it more than anything Sackboy and Crash Bandicoot for sure. As far as Mario and Sonic, it doesn't quite top the best in those series for me. And the reason is that both Mario and Sonic, at their best, they have a little bit more depth to the overall control system, like Sonic's momentum system, for instance, and the way Mario can handle in those games allows for some real, just engaging sort of like mastery of the gameplay. In a way, Astrobot doesn't quite go in that direction. To me, Astrobot kind of reminds me of, if I had to compare it to something, it feels like this combination of Kirby and the Forgotten Land mixed with, which I absolutely loved, mixed with Super Mario Wonder.
Right.
Which is a pretty awesome combination, I think. So, but yeah, it's definitely very high on the overall list. I would say it's one of the best platformers I think I've ever played. Certainly in the 3D space. And on top of that, it's just the technical execution is perfect, basically.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, what can you say? It does everything that they wanted it to do and does it exceptionally well with basically no flaws. I mean, you managed to find one.
I'm sure there's like one or two others, but I captured a lot of hours of this game, and that was the only one that registered. And that's the only one my eyes caught, where it's like, oh, it's a tiny little dip for a very short little time. So otherwise, it's perfect.
Mm-hmm. Oliver, what's your take on all of this?
On the game itself, I played a couple hours right before this direct recording, and I really like it. It's just a joy to play. I love the levels. I love all the little physicalized objects that you bump into. That's really fantastic. I love the haptic feedback. that was great in Astro's Playroom, but here it feels good, and they're not trying to draw attention to it quite as much as they were in Astro's Playroom, so it feels a little bit more natural. The levels feel great to play. I think they have done a good job, kind of like you said with the reference to Kirby and the Forgotten Land, where the levels are pretty linear in driving, but still three-dimensional, but not too open, but they still have secrets, and they still have the various bots to free and rescue. And I think that's very important, because like 3D platformers, to me, I'm not super interested in super open-ended 3D platformers these days, but I do like 3D platformers, and I like ones that can be a bit more directed and show you something that's exciting and give you kind of like a bit more of that roller coaster kind of experience. That's really what I like. It feels kind of like, to draw analogies to other platformers, it feels kind of somewhere between Super Mario 3D World and Super Mario Galaxy, and to me, at least in terms of the openness of it. I've not played nearly as much of it as John has, of course, but those are my initial impressions. But yeah, each level is just a delight, really careful platforming, great artwork. They use context-sensitive actions, but they don't use it in a way that's overwhelming or gimmicky. They kind of throw in a context-sensitive or a unique move at the beginning of a level. You exploit it throughout the level, then you move on, which I think is probably the right approach. I think that it's got to be in the running for some kind of consideration for Game of the Year. It's a fantastic game. I mean, I can't wait to play more of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I too have just played a couple of hours of it, and what can I say? It's very rare that a game just constantly delights you with new mechanics and genuinely surprising things to do. It's just basically a procession of amazingly great, mad ideas being thrust at you time and time again. And it's very rare that they just don't delight you. And
Yep.
so, it's really interesting to actually see people talking about, it's about 12 hours of gaming here. You're missing the point completely. Would you rather have 12 hours of, fun, excitement, surprise, or 12 or 20, 40 hours of basically doing the same thing over and over again? There's just no contest here. This is a completely different type of experience that you've just got to enjoy. And I do think, going back to the DualSense stuff, it's really interesting how well it works. Obviously, you've got audio coming from the screen, but the way they managed to localize it within the controller and add pitch perfect haptics to it.
Yes.
It just works time and time again. And this is kind of like the DualSense dream as it was sold to us when the PlayStation 5 was first announced, and actually when it came out via Astro's Playroom. And here, they've just refined the art. Time and time again, you just get absolutely fantastic immersion and delight from what's happening in the controller. And it's so rare that it actually happens. And actually, talking about Concord, it's another one of those games where the haptics are there, but it actually, in my opinion, makes the game kind of a bit more of a chore to play because you're fighting the controller. Astros is just constantly enhancing the experience, and that's just absolutely magical. And it's really interesting because you can actually define, in terms of, it's interesting what you said in your review there, John, which is that it isn't actually pushing the state of the art in game visuals in any way. But what you are getting is nigh on flawless performance, imagination, joy coming at you time and time again. And, it doesn't need to be using, virtual shadow maps, nanite, or anything like that. It's just perfectly designed based on their existing technology. It just works time and time again. So what can I say? I'm really excited that people accepted that, it's just a great time. That's the bottom line.
Yep.
Anything to add to that, John?
Yeah, so it was interesting. Like, one thing about the visuals is that they kind of mastered this art, and this is something Nintendo's kind of pushed forward with their lower spec hardware, even, of what I would say is enough polygons, where if you look at any object in the scene, everything always looks rounded and perfected. You never look at an object and see, gee, that could use like some smoother edges or more details. It's like everything is exactly as detailed as it needs to be. And you just see the whole level across the map that you cross. It just has this, like, it feels like it's a solid object that's just perfectly put together in a way that you're just moving through. And that's actually where the technical like the chops really show, is that they just did something that looks visually attractive, but it feels so perfectly solid without any of like the weird sacrifices and limitations that we've been seeing more and more, right? We see so many games launching with like these 720p, sub 720p input resolutions, smeary anti-aliasing, lots of like caveats all over the place. And this is just like perfectly sharp and clean. It looks visually attractive, and it just runs exactly as it should. And you also, for the haptics thing, I was just amazed at how like you can be running around and you actually can feel the distinction between his little footsteps and like bumping into objects. So if you're like running through little like physics-based objects, you can actually sort of feel that distinction between bumping the objects and his little footsteps running around.
Yeah.
Like it's nuts that they're able to communicate that, and it doesn't even draw attention to itself. It's just there. And if you actually think about it, you just feel it. It's just so impressive in that regard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really hope people try it. I think it's just, what can I say? It's definitely a Game of the Year contender. However, John, let's talk about a couple more supporter questions.
Okay.
Howdy, gents. This one's from Groovy Duck. From John's review of Astrobot, I don't think he really said a singular negative thing about the game, not counting the lonely frame time spike. By my impressions of Astrobot, without playing it yet, it looks like John is still spot on. But for the sake of content, I love that. Hashtag content. I must ask you, John, what nitpicks do you have with Astrobot? It's like they say in school, there's always room for improvement.
Okay. Well, I would say the HDR implementation isn't as robust as I would like. It's bright and colorful, but it doesn't have that massive separation between light and dark that I really love, where you get those like super vibrant highlights sort of contrasted. Maybe that's tough to do when the colors are so bright as is in this game, but I can't say I was blown away by the HDR. It's like, this is cromulent HDR, as they say.
Yeah, I was going to say, I actually turned off the HDR within 10 minutes of playing it. I did not like it. It seemed quite muted to me. Even things like specular highlights, like throughout the scene, I wasn't getting that super bright.
Did you turn on the bright mode?
I did turn on the bright mode. It was not nearly as bright to me as just playing it in SDR. And also I noticed the blacks appeared slightly raised even. So
I have to admit, Oliver, I noticed that this morning, and do you see it right at the splash screen, the Sony Studios?
That's just the Sony Studios logo that has the blacks raised that high. Once it gets to the next logo, it's back to black, right? It's that specific video.
I get what you're saying.
Blacks.
To me, it just did not look like a game like this in HDR. I'm expecting a lot of contrast, a lot of vibrancy to that image, or super bright specular. I'm expecting those really bright highlights to be present in a lot of the scenes in the game. Maybe they're somewhere else. Again, I did not play it for too long, but it was not that satisfying to me. And then I've seen people talk about the overall look of the game. I don't really think it's going for like that super CG look, kind of like that Knack 2 look, so to speak. I think it's going for something more in the lines of Mario Odyssey or maybe Kirby or something. It's not quite going for that super high-end CG look. I've seen some people talk about that, but I think it looks like clean and sharp, and what it's trying to do, it does very well. So I don't think that's a critique necessarily. It's just like, it's a different approach that you may or may not like. But in terms of a technical concern, I think the game runs super well, feels super great to play. So far from what I've seen, it's just that HDR, I don't know what their internal HDR pipeline looks like, but to me that was like maybe better in SDR, at least for my taste, but it's going to depend on the person there.
Okay, so we've had this particular question several times for 1040 SDF, but let's quickly address it now we've actually got the game. In your opinion, knowing what we could do about the PS5 Pro, what are the chances that Astrobot could reach 4K 120 on it? 4K 120, I think there's probably a CPU and a physics limitation there. Unlocked frame rate, possibly. Increased resolution, increased perceived resolution. Better anti-aliasing, I guess. It's you're going to be sort of just adding trimmings, really, because the nature of the game doesn't really lend itself to supreme scalability. What do you think, John?
Yeah,
RT reflections, possibly.
That's probably one area where they could implement that. just replace their screen space reflections with RT, because their material properties are really great, especially on metal. And I feel like applying proper RT reflections would actually look really great there. But yeah, 120. I mean, 120 would be a nice thing. I would love to see it. But like you say, we don't really know what the load is on things like all the physics and whatnot. So it's hard to say if they could actually get there. So yeah, it feels like it's very specifically designed to be what it is right now.
Yeah.
And RT reflection is probably the one area where I think they could probably improve things in a way that would be like an overall win without too dramatically changing things.
Yeah. I mean, there's no obvious deficiencies, but like for sure, I think in the Aztec level, that opening shot where you get that kind of gold reflective wall and you look at the reflection there and it's not holding up incredibly well. I mean, there are definitely some areas where the screen space reflections aren't quite delivering the level of reflective detail that you might want to see. That would certainly be very cool. But I mean, even if it was just like the bare minimum and it was just bumping up that dynamic res, I don't think that'd be a travesty. I think the game looks good as it stands. I don't think there's any particular area where they are clearly deficient in some way that could be improved by the PlayStation 5 Pro, in my opinion.